Marcus Edwards, a black man enjoying a peaceful afternoon in Fairview, Indiana, never expected his day at Harrison Park to spiral into something that would challenge both his identity and the career of Officer Ryan Caldwell. It was a Saturday, the kind of day when folks wander out to savor the sunshine, maybe read a book under the shade. The air hovered around a mild 75 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to make a light t-shirt comfortable, and the park buzzed with families, joggers, and dogs chasing frisbees. To any outsider, it was a postcard of idyllic American life. On a wooden bench beneath an old sycamore, Marcus sat quietly. He wore a plain navy tee and jeans, the sort of outfit that blended in anywhere. His posture was relaxed, eyes locked on a paperback he'd been meaning to finish all week. Despite his unassuming demeanor, nobody in that park would have guessed that Marcus carried a great deal of influence in his profession. That influence, however, wasn't why he chose Harrison Park that day. He'd come to clear his head, reflect on a busy schedule, and step away from the relentless pressure of his job, even if just for a few hours. Not far away, Officer Ryan Caldwell was on his routine beat. He was in his early 40s, with nearly 15 years on the force, and prided himself on an intuition he believed rarely steered him wrong. He'd patrolled the pond, passed the hot dog cart, circled the kids' playground. Then, scanning the crowd, his gaze settled on Marcus, who was so absorbed in his book that Ryan found it suspicious. After all, Ryan told himself, in a place as familiar as Harrison Park, he liked to believe he knew everyone who fit. And Marcus, apparently, did not. Ryan's thoughts flicked to a recent bulletin about a suspect described as a tall black male, possibly in his 40s, believed to be involved in a string of burglaries around Fairview. The description was vague, but Ryan's gut told him to pay attention. This man before him, quiet, alone, seemed to match at least some of those details. Ryan squared his shoulders and moved in, stepping onto the grass until he was just feet away from Marcus's bench, close enough that a shift in posture would be felt. Marcus felt the eyes on him. He glanced up, meeting Ryan's stare. Neither spoke, but they both knew how these scenarios tended to unfold. Marcus, having dealt with it plenty of times, stayed seated. No sudden moves, no raised voice, no scowls. He closed his book without hurrying and placed it on his lap. Ryan approached with measured steps, resting one hand near his belt, just inches from his baton. "Afternoon," Ryan said with a practiced sort of politeness. The question behind his greeting was unspoken but clear, "What are you doing here?" Marcus nodded. "Afternoon. What brings you out here today?" Ryan continued. It wasn't a casual question. His gaze flicked over Marcus's clothes, the worn paperback, and the way Marcus held himself as though supremely at ease. Marcus offered a small smile. "Just enjoying the weather," he said evenly, eyes drifting around to the bustling park. It wasn't a lie. He reached a point in life where he preferred direct answers over pleasantries, but he wasn't looking for a fight. "You local?" Ryan pressed, still weighing every subtle detail. The small scuff on Marcus's boots, the brand of his jeans, the slight tension in his shoulders. Something about the man's calm demeanor seemed off to Ryan, like an act. Marcus shrugged gently. "I've been around," he said, polite but not overly friendly. Ryan's stance shifted. He didn't like that answer. He was used to controlling conversations, and this man's composure felt, to him, like defiance. "Mind if I see some ID?" Marcus's faint smile faded. The question carried more weight than it sounded. He inhaled quietly, preparing for the path he knew all too well. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, voice measured. Ryan's hand tensed on his belt. The calmness in Marcus's voice, that unwavering eye contact, it rattled him. "You will be if you don't cooperate," he shot back. Marcus glanced around, noticing a few onlookers near the dog run and the concession stand. If things escalated, they'd have an audience. With a resigned sigh, he slipped a hand into his pocket, pulled out a simple black wallet, and handed it over. He moved slowly, letting Ryan see every inch of the motion. Years of experiences taught him caution. Ryan snatched the driver's license, scanning it for any sign of wrongdoing. Marcus Edwards, an address in Fairview, 0 flags in the system. It didn't confirm or deny anything about burglaries or suspicious activity. Stand up, Ryan commanded, stepping back. Marcus, feeling the tension rolling off the officer, obeyed. He stood, hands visible, posture non-threatening. But Ryan's unease only deepened. His instincts had brought him this far, and he couldn't back down now without losing face. In a swift motion, Ryan unclipped a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around," he ordered, voice hard. Marcus closed his eyes for a split second, the sting of injustice pulsing through him. But as he turned, he felt the heavy click of steel around his wrists. People in the vicinity began to notice, whispers traveling quickly. Marcus remained quiet, swallowing the anger, remembering that anything else might be taken for aggression. Ryan escorted Marcus across the grass to his patrol car. That unease in Ryan's stomach deepened. Something felt wrong, but it was too late now, he'd chosen his course. Marcus kept his composure. He wasn't worried about who he was. Ryan, on the other hand, was about to find out soon enough. Marcus slid into the back seat, staring out the window as Ryan moved to the driver's seat and started the engine. The ride to the station was silent, each man with his own spinning thoughts. Ryan tried to cling to the belief he was doing his job, ignoring that gnawing voice in the back of his mind. Marcus mentally rehearsed how this would go. He'd seen it before, more times than he cared to admit. At the station, Ryan led Marcus inside, grip on Marcus's arm unyielding. In the reception area, a younger officer, name tag reading Officer Palmer, looked up from a stack of paperwork. What's going on?" Palmer asked, scanning the scene. Ryan handed over Marcus's ID. "Suspicious activity," he muttered. "Thought I'd bring him in." Palmer glanced at the name, then darted a look at Marcus. Recognition flickered briefly, but the officer hid it well. "Captain Morgan's in her office," Palmer said quietly, returning the ID. "You should probably take him there." Ryan stiffened. He hadn't planned on roping the captain into this, but it wasn't optional now. With a jerk of his head, he ushered Marcus down the hallway. Marcus walked calmly, eyes forward, betraying no fear or anger. Yet the tension crackled between them, intensifying with each step. They stopped before a closed door labeled Captain M. Morgan. Ryan rapped his knuckles twice. "Come in," a voice answered. Ryan pushed the door open and propelled Marcus inside. Caught off guard, Captain Monica Morgan looked up from her desk. For a fleeting moment, her expression shifted to surprise before she schooled it back to a neutral professional mask. "Officer Caldwell," she said, clearing her throat. "What's this about?" "Got him in the park, Captain," Ryan explained stiffly. "He was acting suspicious, wouldn't cooperate. I brought him in." Captain Morgan's gaze flicked from Ryan to Marcus. For a heartbeat, recognition flashed in her eyes, then vanished behind a calm facade. "I see," she said, lips pressed thinly together. "Officer Caldwell, would you step outside for a minute?" Ryan bristled, reluctant to lose the upper hand. "But Captain." "Now." Her voice left no room for argument. Frowning, Ryan let go of Marcus's arm and exited the office, closing the door. The moment it latched shut, Captain Morgan's demeanor changed. "Mr. Edwards," she said softly, her voice carrying an undercurrent of apology. "I'm sorry for the trouble." Marcus exhaled slowly. "No apology needed, Captain. Not your fault." She rose from her chair. "I know who you are, but Officer Caldwell doesn't. I can assure you we'll straighten this out. May I ask, why didn't you tell him who you are from the start?" Marcus's mouth quirked in a sad smile. "Because it shouldn't matter. My name, my position, that shouldn't be a prerequisite for respect." Captain Morgan sighed. "I agree. But I suppose it's a moot point now." She reached for the doorknob. "Let me bring him back in. This won't take long." When Ryan re-entered, the tension in the small office felt suffocating. Captain Morgan stood behind her desk, arms folded. "Officer Caldwell," she said in a measured tone, "Mr. Edwards is not the suspect you're looking for. You will release him immediately." Ryan blinked. "But, Captain." "I said now," she repeated firmly. His jaw clenched. Slowly, he fumbled for the handcuff key, stepping behind Marcus. The cuffs clicked open. Marcus rubbed his wrists, ignoring the slight burn. He locked eyes with Ryan. "Thank you, officer," he said, voice calm yet weighty. Ryan had no response. He stepped back, grappling with confusion and budding apprehension. Turning to Captain Morgan, Marcus offered a respectful nod. "I appreciate the quick resolution, Captain. We'll talk soon." "Yes, of course," she replied. "Again, I'm sorry this happened." With that, Marcus left. Silence stretched in the captain's office until she finally turned to Ryan. "You stay here. I'll be back." Her words brooked no argument. Ryan wound up at his desk, trying and failing to focus on paperwork. His mind was a snarled mess. He'd arrested a man who had turned out to be someone far from an ordinary civilian. Not that it should have mattered, but now his own gut felt like it had betrayed him. He tried to bury himself in files, but every typed sentence reminded him of how quickly he'd judged, how thoroughly he'd messed up. A few minutes later, Captain Morgan summoned him into her office again. She wore an expression that threatened a storm. "Officer Caldwell," she said in a clipped tone, "do you have any idea who Marcus Edwards is?" Ryan shook his head, uneasy. "No, Captain. Some guy in the park." Her posture stiffened. "He's a top agent with the FBI, one of their best. This entire fiasco is going to land right on your doorstep, and, by extension, ours." The words rocked Ryan like a physical blow. FBI. He'd never considered that possibility. Captain, I didn't know." "That's precisely the problem," she interjected. "You didn't know and you assumed. This was nothing but your bias at play. We can't afford that from any of our officers." He tried to form a defense, but no words came. He stood there, silent, as the truth of his mistake congealed into cold dread. "For now, you're on administrative leave," Captain Morgan continued. "An investigation will be conducted. The Bureau is involved, and I've already spoken to our higher-ups. This is serious, Caldwell. Depending on the findings, you might be terminated." The world felt like it was collapsing around him. He'd been an officer nearly 2 decades, priding himself on experience, intuition, and a sixth sense. And in one swift move, he'd undone it all. He left her office in a daze. The station's corridors, usually a source of familiarity and control, now seemed foreign. Outside, in the station's parking lot, Ryan walked to his car like a man half asleep. For a moment, he just stood, the crisp Indiana air biting his cheeks. The day had started like any other patrol. Now, he faced the potential ruin of his career. All because he'd targeted an innocent man based on a hunch he thought was infallible. When he got home, the house felt empty, a hollow shell. Ryan thought about calling his wife, Amy, but couldn't bring himself to do it. He had no idea how to tell her he might lose everything. Instead, he sat in the living room, staring blankly at the muted TV. For the first time, a sliver of doubt slipped into his mind. Maybe he hadn't been the righteous protector he always believed he was. Maybe he'd been acting on stereotypes, assumptions that had festered unchallenged. Days passed. Ryan felt suspended in limbo, hearing nothing except that the investigation was underway. He avoided calls from most coworkers. He walked his dog aimlessly, clocking miles around the block without any real sense of direction. Sleep was elusive, overshadowed by nightmares about being stripped of his badge, confronting a life with no sense of purpose. Then came the summons, a review scheduled for Friday. Ryan dreaded it, but he had no choice. He arrived that morning, heart hammering, stepping into a sterile conference room. Captain Morgan was there, a few people from internal affairs, and, to his surprise, Marcus Edwards, wearing a subdued suit, calm and collected as ever. The tension in the air was tangible. Captain Morgan began the formalities. "Officer Caldwell," she said evenly, "we're here to evaluate your actions in arresting Mr. Edwards." She outlined the charges, profiling, lack of evidence, and what it meant for the department's integrity. Ryan tried to maintain composure, but the weight of it all pressed down like a loaded truck. He repeated his version of events, the vague suspect description, the suspicious behavior, how Marcus allegedly refused to cooperate. But every word felt weak. At one point, Marcus spoke, voice calm but firm, "I was reading. That's all." His gaze bored into Ryan's, and Ryan squirmed internally. Another official asked if Ryan had considered any other possibility, or if he'd let bias lead him. Ryan stumbled through excuses, but the truth was painfully obvious. As the meeting closed, Captain Morgan delivered the final blow, "We'll decide your future here once we've reviewed everything. Expect the outcome soon." Ryan left, despair settling in. He wanted to defend himself, but how do you defend prejudice? Even if it wasn't deliberate, the harm was real. Marcus, on the other hand, left the station, returning to his home office that same afternoon. A man of quiet influence, he could have raged publicly. Instead, he typed an email to the Precinct Oversight Board, reiterating the need for real reforms in Fairview's police. He wasn't out for vengeance, but he demanded accountability. Meanwhile, Ryan's wife, Amy, finally cornered him at home. He confessed everything, how he'd arrested the wrong man, how it turned out to be an FBI agent, how he might lose his job. The conversation was painful. She pressed him for answers, asked if he realized how serious it was. He admitted he felt lost, identity shattered. She told him not to give up on himself, but the advice barely penetrated his gloom. Another hearing happened a few days later, quieter, with just the Internal Review Board and Captain Morgan. This time they'd reached a verdict: Ryan was to be terminated. The words dropped like a judge's gavel. "You may appeal, but it's unlikely to change," Captain Morgan said. She told him to turn in his badge and uniform immediately. Ryan left the station in a haze, jobless for the first time in 2 decades, his sense of self shredded. He drove home, ignoring messages on his phone, messages from old academy pals and co-workers wanting details. He had nothing to say. At the house, he poured himself a glass of bourbon and stared at the wall, replaying every step that led him here, every misjudgment. Marcus, across town, sat at his kitchen table, reflecting on the chain of events. He felt relief that justice had been served but recognized it was a small step in a much bigger struggle. He typed another email to the station, requesting updates on the promised reforms. Captain Morgan responded, detailing new trainings in bias awareness and de-escalation. Marcus was cautiously optimistic. Words were easy, systemic change was not. Yet he couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, how the man had looked at the hearing, burdened with a shame deeper than mere embarrassment. Marcus didn't relish seeing him destroyed. True change, Marcus believed, sometimes required a personal reckoning, but also an opportunity to learn. On impulse, Marcus dialed a number he'd gotten from a contact at the station. The phone rang twice. "Hello." Ryan answered, voice laced with uncertainty. Marcus exhaled. "Ryan Caldwell. This is Marcus Edwards." Silence. Then, quietly, "Why were you calling?" "Because I don't think this has to be the end for you," Marcus said. "What happened was wrong, but I believe people can grow from their mistakes." Ryan's voice was tight, shaky. "I don't know where to start. My life's basically gone." Marcus replied calmly, admitting that is a start. "You have a chance to do something different now, listen, learn, and change." Ryan swallowed audibly. For the first time, a small flicker of hope broke through. I appreciate that, he said hoarsely. I never saw this coming. Neither did I, Marcus admitted. But here we are. Don't waste it. When they hung up, Ryan found himself staring at his phone, a swirl of shame and relief flooding him. Someone he wronged had offered him a second chance at humanity. He didn't know if he deserved it, but he was determined not to dismiss it. The following weeks passed in slow motion. The precinct concluded their investigation. Captain Morgan announced deeper changes, rolling out workshops on implicit bias and new guidelines for stops and searches. Marcus checked in regularly, ensuring promises weren't hollow. He resumed his normal routine, working in a demanding federal role, jogging at daybreak, volunteering on weekends. He'd think about the thousands of people who didn't have his resources, who got entangled in even worse encounters. That fueled him to keep fighting for reform. As for Ryan, each morning was a fresh reminder that he no longer wore a badge. He sorted out finances, tried to figure out how to fill his time, eventually deciding that ignoring the problem wasn't an option. Spurred by guilt and a nagging sense he needed to do better, he attended community events on race and policing. It was humbling to stand in a meeting hall with neighbors who recognized him as the cop who messed up. But he forced himself to speak honestly about his failings. One evening, he ended up at a discussion group in the basement of a local church, chairs arranged in a circle, a chalkboard listing the evening's topics. People from all backgrounds shared stories of discrimination or disillusionment. Ryan listened, feeling the knots in his chest twist. When a speaker asked if anyone had insights on bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community, Ryan took a breath and stood, heart thundering. He introduced himself. My name is Ryan Caldwell. I used to be a police officer until I made a mistake that cost me my job, and laid out the facts plainly. The group listened without jeering, letting him speak. When he finished, a subdued hush lingered, then the speaker commended him for honesty but reminded him it was only the beginning of a long road. Outside the meeting, as Ryan prepared to leave, someone called his name. He turned, startled, to find Marcus leaning against a metal railing near the steps. Marcus offered a nod. Didn't expect to see you here, Ryan said, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. I'm involved with a few local organizations, Marcus explained. Thought I'd drop by. You spoke well in there. Takes courage. Ryan managed a faint smile. I'm trying to learn. Marcus's expression was calm, empathic. Learning's a process. Keep at it. They shook hands. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement of progress, a sign that Ryan was on a path, however rocky, that might lead to redemption. Over the next 3 months, the changes at the precinct became more evident. Captain Morgan invited Marcus to the station again to discuss ongoing reforms. Officers greeted him with a polite respect that felt more genuine than forced. In her office, the captain detailed new training modules and consistent oversight. Marcus noted every improvement. It's good to see real steps being taken, he said. Captain Morgan gave him a small smile. We still have a ways to go, but I'm determined to push forward. By the way, Caldwell's been active in some of our outreach. He's talked to a few community groups about what happened. Marcus processed that with a pensive nod. He thought back to the day Ryan locked him in cuffs, determined to pin him as a criminal. Now, the ex-officer was apparently trying to atone. It's never easy to face your flaws, Marcus said softly. I'm glad he's making the effort, the captain replied. People can change, right? That's what I hope, Marcus agreed. He left the station feeling a cautious sense of victory. Step by step, inch by inch, progress was happening. That afternoon, he returned home, settled on his porch with a glass of iced tea, and watched the Indiana sun set behind the neat row of houses. A gentle breeze ruffled the edges of his paperback. Peace, at least for now. His phone buzzed on the side table. A text from an unknown number read, "Thank you for allowing me this chance to be better." I won't waste it. Ryan Caldwell. Marcus typed back a short reply, an affirmation, a note of encouragement, and set the phone aside. The journey to real justice was far from over, but for the moment, he could breathe. One officer had been held accountable, new reforms were in motion, and a man who had once misused his authority was now dedicating himself to bridging the very divide he'd helped widen. And maybe, just maybe, that was how lasting change began.